So this week, you have the hardest factoring test of your life on Friday. You'll be good at it by then, but don't expect that it'll be easy. This will be a challenging test. Do you remember how to factor that first one? Well, my rules have always been this. You always look and see, is there anything you can factor out in the first place? That's called the GCF. Is there any GCF here? No. So then you go to two parentheses, and then you ask yourself, what do I start with? Usually you put an x and an x there, and you see if it works. Is that going to work for the first term? X and x? Does that make x squared? So then it works. Okay. So then the next question is, what signs should I use? There's a minus in the problem. There will be a minus in the answer. Guaranteed. The next question is it a minus and a plus or a minus and a minus? Well, if the last number is negative, it has to be a plus and a minus, so that must be a plus. See how I'm following these little rules that I tried teaching you the whole time? They always work. That's why I picked these rules, because they always work. And now the last thing is two numbers that multiply to 4. Well, you do have two choices, 2 and 2 or 1 and 4. And in this case, I hope you picked 2 and 2. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Awesome. How did you know not to pick 4 and 1? Because look, we wanted these two to cancel. Negative 2x and 2x. Because this doesn't have that middle term. It doesn't have any just x's in it. All right. Now I want to stretch you to remember this one is positive in front. That means that it ends going up. Next, do you remember that it's a parabola shifted down 4? Do you remember that way of thinking of parabolas? So then do you get it must be something like that? And then what are the 2 and the negative 2? They are these spots. They're called the what's? X-intercepts. And that's why we factored it, so we can find the x-intercepts. Those are also known as the solutions, and the zeros, and the roots, and the solutions. These two things are huge. And you find them because you factored it. All right, now I'd like you to try this one. And all the same rules apply. Is there a GCF that you can factor out of everything? Is there? No. So then you just jump into two sets of parentheses. And now you ask yourself, would an x and an x work as my starting? No, that's not going to make x to the 4th. Mr. Breen, what does it have to be? X squared and x squared. Mark, is there a negative in this problem?
Yeah.
So there's a negative in the answer. Is it 2 negatives?
No.
No. What number could prove that? What could you look at to show that it must be a plus and a minus?
-5.
Yeah, this number here is negative, so it must be a plus and a minus. All right, Luke, how do I finish it?
5 times 1.
It's got to be a 5 and a 1. Now be strategic about where you put it.
It should be x squared minus 5, and x squared plus 1.
And if you didn't know to put it there, maybe it's because you weren't looking ahead and seeing what these would come out to be. Negative 5x squared, positive 1x squared, and together he did it right because it comes out to negative 4x squared. Okay, awesome. It's factored, but then, really, really important, could you solve it from here? Well, remember, if you've been just doing them in your head the whole time, you may have forgotten that this really is x squared minus 5 needs to equal 0, and then you could solve that, right? And x squared plus 1 needs to equal 0, and then you could solve that, right? And I think one of these you're going to end up doing a square root of a negative. Does that ring a bell? Take a second and solve those two red equations. This is all on today's worksheet, and it's all on your test on Friday. I'm not wasting your time. You got to know all of this stuff. You got two little equations. Step up, solve those two equations. Yes, you'll have a square root of 5, and that's fine. That happens. You're not going to know what the square root of 5 is. You'll just call it the square root of 5. Did you remember the absolute value, though? When you square root the variable, This absolute value is probably the most forgotten thing on the test, and it's wrong. Need to have that. Because that's what gives you two answers. There's not two answers to this. Square root of 5 is a square root of 5. Can't just put a slap of plus and minus on that. That doesn't make any sense. But if it's an absolute value of x, which it is, then you get x equals square root of 5 and x equals the square root of 5, and you'll know that that's crazy. You're not going to do the exact same thing twice. So you go put a negative on that spot to remind yourself x equals root 5 and x equals negative root 5. So there's my two answers. Now, did you ever do a square root of a negative here? Were you square rooting a negative number? No, so these are real. On this one, and a square root, and you square root, and you get absolute value of x, you get I here. That feels imaginary, and it is imaginary. Am I done? Is it just x equals I? No. The absolute value tells you there's two parts to the answer. X equals I, and x equals negative I. How many answers do I have anyway? Two imaginaries and two reals, making a total of 4. And the smartest students on the test will check that they found all 4 answers. You look back at the problem and you go, this is supposed to have 4 answers because there's to the 4th. And otherwise, if you don't check and make sure you have 4 answers, that's a really missed opportunity. It happens all the time. People have forgotten one of the answers and they get like 3 out of the 4 answers. Because there's a complicated problem. So it's a great way to check yourself before you wreck yourself, in the immortal words of Ice-T. The rapper. Okay. So, that's heavy-duty factoring and solving it down and getting real and imaginary answers. Now, would you know which of them are x-intercepts? Hint, they aren't all x-intercepts. Steichen, how do you know which ones are not x-intercepts?
The ones that aren't real.
Yeah, if they're not real, how are you supposed to put them on a graph? You won't see the x-intercepts for those. These would be the x-intercepts. These are answers, they're just not real, so they can't be x-intercepts. All right, that should have brought back a lot of factoring, but there's one more kind of factoring that we haven't talked about that you learned on Friday, and it's huge. It's on the test multiple times. It's called factor by grouping, aka divide and conquer. Write this one down. Write that one down. Remember me saying that we in World War II convinced Hitler that we were going to go north? We actually went south. He had half of his army, in fact, the better half of his army up north. We divided his army into 2. Just classic war strategies from way back. You don't want to go all against, all your guys against all their guys. Bad idea. So we divide it in 2 parts and then factor them. And what's the first step in factoring? Look for a GCF. I don't see any GCF. Oh, wait a minute. If I just look at the first term, I see a GCF. Carlos, what's the GCF on that first part?
X
Nice. And then what's left after you factored it out?
X plus 3.
Yes. On the second part, I'm underlining in yellow. Cooper, can you tell me what goes into both of those? And I'm going to put plus 6 just because it'll work nicer later. Parker, Jesser, when I factor the 6 out from this, what's left? Yes. Now, the fact that these are the same is not a coincidence. In fact, if they weren't the same, something went wrong. They'll always be the same. Wes, can you tell me then what the new GCF of this and this is, and therefore should go in front? What do they both have in common? Greatest common factor. Close. X plus 3. See, they both have exactly an x plus 3. Andrew, I think you finished already. What you got left?
Put the x squared plus 6 behind it.
X squared plus 6. Nice. Now, without even getting the answers, do you see that we have one real answer for sure? And that will for sure be an x-intercept because it's real. That answer is -3. But I'm feeling like this one might have imaginary answers. Take 2 seconds and solve x squared plus 6 equals 0. You've got it. These have got to become like automatic for you. Easy peasy. It was on your last test. It was in the test called complex numbers. And then we had a cumulative on it. You've been tested on this twice. You've got to know how to solve these. There's plenty of complicated things left. This has to be the easy part. And as soon as you find yourself square rooting a negative, does that mean you just stop? No, you say, that means it's imaginary though. So there better be an I in your answer. Hadley, absolute value of x equals what? How do I simplify this part right here?
X or -6i,
I
square root
square root 6. There you go. Bennett, this does the splits. To do this, you could write 2 identical equations and then just slap a negative in the right spot on one of them. What are the 2 identical equations?
Negative I squared.
No, that's not the start of the equation.
Oh, x equals
X equals
I squared 6.
I root 6. And then the other equation is identical. X equals I root 6, except
Negative.
there's a negative at the front of it. 2 answers. That and that. Are they real? No, they're imaginary. So does that mean that, do they have x-intercepts then? No. They count as solutions, but they're not x-intercepts. These are just 2 of my solutions. Where's my third one? Oh, I never even got it. X equals -3. There's 3 solutions. Is that how many solutions I was supposed to have? Yes, because you check here. All right. Now, that just brings us up to current. That's everything I taught you about factoring before you took 5 days off. All right, so now here's the new thing. Okay, this is called synthetic division. Now, these problems are really intense, and so this is the part where you really need to write yourself a really good example of how to do one of these. You might be referring back to that on tonight's homework and again for the test on Friday. Not the long division. It's called synthetic division. All right, so I want to set this up this way. If I wanted to know, does 7 go into 22, that's me factoring the 22. 7 times 3 is 21, but I have a remainder of 1. So I ask you, are 7 and 3 the factors of 22? No, didn't work. 7 times 3 isn't 22. Because why? Because we had a remainder. I'm going to be talking about a remainder in a minute. What you really want is a remainder of 0. See, if I said 24 and I said, does 6 go into 24? 6 times 4 is 24, and then there's no remainder. That's what you want. You want no remainder, because then these were the factors of 24. See what I'm talking about there? That's why the remainder, you want the remainder to be 0. Otherwise, if it's like this, it didn't work. All right. So that's set up. Here is your first polynomial synthetic division. So write this down carefully. X to the 5th plus 3x to the fourth minus 10x to the third plus x squared. And I have to pause for just a second. All right, so we've got this thing copied down to the plus x squared, and now we have a minus 3x and a plus 2. And the crazy thing about this is you've never factored anything like this, right? You can factor this, and I'm going to show you how. All right, it's a thing called synthetic division. Synthetic motor oil isn't just like oil that came out of the ground. It's like a special process. This isn't normal division. This isn't like 7 going into 22. Okay, but it's division. It's just a synthetic form of it. That synthetic oil, it's not regular oil. It's made up, but it's kind of like oil. This is kind of like division. It's synthetic division. All right, so the thing I'm going to divide it by is 2. So we'll tell you that you can divide it by 2. Now, that's not like dividing 2 out of everything. That'd be like a GCF. If you look close, there is no GCF. There's nothing in common everywhere. So everybody write a 2 and put a little box like that. You're kind of walling off the 2. You don't want it to mix in with the other numbers. Okay. Next, in this division process, I'm going to see if you can figure out where I got these numbers from. 1, 3, negative 10, 1, negative 3, and 2. Do you see where I got them from? Basically, it's all the coefficients that were in front of the variables, but there's no more variables. All right, copy this down. You need one good example of this. All right. Next, you draw a line, not right under them. You need room to put something underneath them first, but draw a line with some space. Are you copied up to here? Okay. What are we doing again? We're dividing. We're doing long division. Why? Because we're factoring. We're factoring this beast out. All right. Now, this will be the second time I've quoted a rapper today. The first one was Ice-T. This one is Snoop Dogg. The way you begin the problem is drop it like it's hot. Drop that 1 down below the line. This may be the first and only time your math teacher will quote a rapper twice in one day. All right. Drop the 1. And now you're going to do a combo of multiply, then add. Then you multiply, then you 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 add. And you end up at the end of the problem with a 0 because you'll have a 0 remainder. Remember how we wanted a 0 at the end of the problem? All right. So multiply first. Draw a line like that to show yourself what to multiply. 1 times 2 makes 2. And then just right underneath this, put a 5. Do you realize what I did? I added them together. First I multiplied, then I added. Now what do you think I'm going to do next? Multiply. 5 times 2 makes 10. Now what do you think I'm going to do? Add them, and I get 0. Now what do you think I'm going to do? Multiply them. 0 times 2, 0. Now I'm going to add them. 1. Now I'm going to multiply. 1 times 2, 2. Now I'm going to add them. Negative 1. Now I'm going to multiply them. Very big shock. What's negative 1 times 2? Negative 2. And what's 2 minus 2 at the very end of the problem? 0, and that means you won. If it ever doesn't come out to 0, that means it didn't factor. This one factored. Now, I know you don't know what the answer is yet, but do you get I had a 0 at the end and that's the remainder? And then that's a good thing? Okay. Now, you want one really good example. If you aren't copying this down, I don't know how you're going to learn this. Now, to get the actual answer, we need a parentheses right here. And what we're going to do is put this, will tell us what to put there. Careful. X minus 2. Because 2 is the answer. And x minus 2 is the factor that would go with that. Because see, the 2 is supposed to make it equal 0, right? That's why it is a 2 at the top, but it comes out as a parentheses x minus 2. All right. Now, put a parenthesis here and here. And you know all those variables that we stripped out of it to make it easier because we didn't want to deal with them? We just took the coefficients. Now we got to put those variables back in. And so, this last number is the constant. You know, kind of like this 2 here? It doesn't have an x on it or anything. But this one has an x. The 0, take a wild guess what it has. Not an x, an x squared. What's the next one you think I'm going to put? X cubed, and then last one, x to the 4th. Now, there's nothing in between them. That means they're all positive. So I'm going to go back and put in just a little plus sign, and a plus sign, a little plus sign here, because they're all positives. And that is the answer. We just factored it. This giant thing, this giant nasty thing, just got factored into this times this. Now, I had a kid ask last hour, could I just leave out the 0x squared? Yes, you could, because 0x squared is really 0, isn't it? All right, cool. You just learned how to do the hardest kind of factoring that there is. Factoring things that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms. You couldn't divide and conquer this puppy. There was no GCF. We did synthetic long division. All right, that was as beastly as they would ever get. It'll only be easier from here. Now I'm going to show you a nice easy one. Would you guys all agree that x squared minus 6x minus 7 would factor really easy to x and a plus and a minus, and it'd be 7 and 1. We've done like 8 million of those, right? You get that, right? Okay. Then this question would go like this. Show that -1 is a factor. You write the -1, you wall it off. What 3 numbers do you think I'm about to write? One, -6, and -7 was the correct answer there. Then you draw a line across, leaving room. Where synthetic dividing is super easy problem, just because you know it's going to work. We already factored it. We know this thing factors. All right. Snoop Dogg will tell you how to start. Drop it like it's hot. And then I multiply. And then I add. And then I multiply. This times this. And that worked out nice. Because when I add them, I get 0. You wall it off again. Because that's, if it doesn't end in 0, it didn't factor. But yay, it ended in 0. I have 0 remainder. Now right here and right here is where you get your answer. Caitlin, can you do this -1 turning into a factor?
So x plus 1.
Perfect. Jack Breen, what do you think I write for this?
We're gonna add the x's.
We are. This is the constant, so leave it alone. What do I think I do?
You add x to it.
Just an x. That's it. And I know you must be like, I could have done that so much easier if I just factored it the normal way. X minus 7 and x plus 1. But we're learning how to do a really complicated process called synthetic long division. So we started with a fairly easy one. All right, now we're going to move it up a notch to a medium synthetic long division. X to the third minus 3x squared plus 2x minus 6. Now I know that some of you are going to realize this one will factor by grouping, but don't do it because I'm teaching you synthetic long division. If you don't ever learn it, you will not do well on this test. You've got to do synthetic long division or you won't pass this test, or at least you won't get an A or a B. So here's how you synthetic long divide it. I have to tell you what number to put in and see if it works. Now, I'm actually going to show you tomorrow how you can figure out that number, but for right now, I'm just going to tell you that number, and that number is 3. And I'm telling you, factor the 3 out of it. And then you write a series of numbers here, 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 here. You draw the line, you drop it like it's hot. See if you can do this. I'll pause for a second and give this a shot. So medium in full effect. 1, -3. 2, -6. Drop it like it's hot. Multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and it up with a 0. Just to clarify, it doesn't always. What if it doesn't come out with 0? Well, then you say it didn't factor. And your proof is you have to have the right remainder then. Like if you did it right and it came out like a remainder of 8 or whatever, then that's your proof. You say it didn't factor because it had a remainder of 8. All right, in this case, it had a remainder of 0. Cool. So then your actual answer comes out to, this comes down and makes a little parenthesis of an x minus 3. And then these guys make a parenthesis. That 2 is the constant, so that's 0 x's and that's 1x squared. Did you catch that? And these are all positive, so we put a little plus and a plus, and there's my answer. X minus 3 times x squared plus 0x, optional 0x, plus 2. All right. And now a typical homework assignment for today would say, what are the solutions? And you'd say, 3 is one of the solutions, and it's real. But that is hard to do in my head, so I write x squared plus 2 needs to equal 0, and x squared equals -2, and I'm going to square root a negative. I can tell that's going to come out imaginary. And if there's ever imaginaries, there's 2 of them. Don't forget that. And that means there would be 2 answers for this, because that absolute value you'd be getting, it splits it into 2. 2 answers for that, 1 answer for that, total of 3 answers. Look, it started with a 3. There's going to be 3 answers. It all makes sense. All right. Now, we're ready to start the really hardcore. It's an assignment. Now, we're going to open up the assignment. There's only one in there. It's a PDF. It's got 8 questions. First thing you do is go cross off number 8. It's just a little too many problems. So go to the end, cross off problem 8. Find the homework, cross off problem 8. I'm going to start number 1 with you. We'll do a few synthetic long divisions off today's homework. Jack, you there yet?
Yeah.
Excellent. Could you read me the first question that they ask you to... Wait a minute. I forgot. I was smarter than that. I actually put it on my thing. It's right here. Hopefully it says that. Okay, good. Now, remember the rules. This is factoring. Number 1 rule of factoring is look for a GCF, and if you look, you'll find. There's a GCF on this one. Koenig. Oh, the Koenig is gone, sorry. Let's see, who should I bother with this one? Charlie, what's the thing that's a GCF that can come out of all of them? Yeah. I'm gonna factor the x out, and then that's just regular factoring here. This is not synthetic yet. Just taking an x out of everything. That leaves x squared minus 16x plus 28. Now, if you're good at factoring, you could just factor it from here, except on the test, if it says use synthetic division, you have to show you know how to synthetic divide. So even though I could factor this in my head, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna use synthetic, which you put the 2 that they gave you right here. And then we bring down a 1, because there's a 1 in front, right? 1, negative 16, and positive 28. Draw the line with some room. Stay with it. Your hand is not moving. You're not with it. We're almost done here. And you'll have a bunch of work done. All right, drop it like it's hot. Multiply. Add. Multiply. How do I know it worked? Got a 0 remainder. I wall off that 0 because it's the remainder. It doesn't tell me my factors. Now I bring 2 sets of parentheses right here and here. Carlos, what's the first set of parentheses right here? What's that? X minus 2. Perfect. And then, if that's the constant, you just slap an X right there. If there would have been 3 things, I would have put an X on one of them and an X squared on another one. If there would have been like 5 things, I would have put an X squared, an X to the third, an X to the fourth. You just keep on moving up. If you get more terms here than just 2, then you put on X squared, X to the third, X to the fourth, etc. And that's done. It's factored. Now watch, this is a trap. X minus 2 and X minus 14. Are there any of you that were smart enough to go, but it's supposed to be X to the third? Something's wrong. That's because we factored out this X at the beginning and he needs to be in the front. Watch for that. In your head real quick, make sure, do I have the right degree here? That green X right there is such a common oops. I'm trying to remind you to always look back at the original problem and go, it's supposed to be X to the third. There's supposed to be 3 answers. See, if you only got solutions of 2 and 4, that also would be a sign. You'd be like, wait a minute, there's only 2 answers. There's supposed to be 3 answers because it's to the third. What's the other answer then? What makes this part 0? 0. So I got 3 answers. X equals 0, and it can be 2, and it can be 4. 0, 2, and 4. The only time you'll have imaginary solutions is if you ended up square rooting a negative to solve one of these. Did you end up square rooting a negative? I didn't. So there's no imaginaries on this one. If you're wondering where that 0 came from, it's because you don't get that you make each part equal to 0. That part equal to 0 is X equals 0. This part equal to 0 is 2. This part equal to 0 is 4. That's where you get the 3 answers from. All right, now, if you don't factor out the GCF, if all you do is like this, 8, 2, negative 14, negative 16, you're going to screw it up. You'll get it wrong. Why? Because you didn't factor out the GCF first. Always factor out the GCF first. Zola, what's the GCF on this one? 2x squared, very nice. Caitlin, what do you get after you factor out the 2x squared?
You, you get, x squared.
Yep.
Minus 7x.
Yep.
Plus 8. I mean, minus 8.
Perfect. Now, if I didn't have this requirement of use synthetic division, then I would just factor this and I'd be done. You could do that on a test unless it says use synthetic division. Well, then I guess I gotta do synthetic division and I gotta know that 8 goes into it. So I go 8 goes here, 1, -7, -8, draw the line, drop it like it's hot. One times 8, 8, add them together, 1 times 8, 8, add them together, 0. Cool, it worked. And hopefully by now you're getting good at interpreting this and saying that means x minus 8. And that's the constant, so I just slap an x on this one, and that means positive 1, right? So I put a plus 1, and there we go, x minus 8, x plus 1, trap. I could see a kid doing it, couldn't you? Isaac, what's missing from my factored form answer?
The 2x squared.
Exactly. Now, if I do a quick lead term in my head and I go 2x to the second, third, fourth, 2x to the fourth, that matches up. That makes sense. And I better have 4 answers when I give my solutions. Now, this is going to mess with your head a little bit because you might be like, I'm getting x equals 0 and 8 and -1. That's only 3 answers, Mr. Server. And there's supposed to be 4? It's because this one was a double. It was a bounce at 0. All right, was there any imaginaries? No. Why not? Because as I solved these, I didn't have to ever do the square root of a negative, so there wasn't any imaginaries. All right, now this one, I didn't even catch this last hour. It says x minus 2 is not a factor. It's not a factor. So you do synthetic, but because it's not a factor, at the end, you won't have a remainder of 0. And that's your proof that it was not a factor. So do synthetic and be proud of the fact it doesn't end with 0. Whatever it ends with, that's the remainder. So you got to find that remainder. Let's say it ends up being like -26 at the end. Well, then that's your remainder, and that's your proof that it was not a factor. All right, last one I'm going to do with you, and I just started that one, but let's go next page. Three starts out here. There's a 1 in the very front, right? 1, -3, 5, -15, -6, and +18. If you do this right, you will get a remainder of 0. And if you don't get a remainder of 0, go back and figure out where you screwed up your multiply or your add. 1 times 3 is 3. Add them together gets 0. At least you get you started right there. All right. Now, remember how I said you could skip number 8. So what do you have left? You have to do problem. Well, I started number 3 for you. So finish that off, and then you do 4, 5, 6, and 7. You have 4 questions. They're just big. But that's your homework. You got a bunch of time. Because of the news show not working today, you have more time than normal. So please feel free to come up and ask me questions. Do you have to be an expert at this? No, not till Friday. But by Friday, we have a test on this stuff. There's only one more day of new material. I'm going to make that tomorrow. And then Wednesday and Thursday are review. Test is Friday. All right, that's all I got for you for today.